Afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming to the first Transportation Commission meeting of 2025. Excited to have you all here. I'm going to call this meeting to order. We'll do some roll call. Just say your name or acknowledge your presence. Brendan Cruikshank,
Present.
Justin Denardi, John Hanson. I am present. Bob Kuhn
Present.
and Josh Stone.
Present. Hello.
Other commission members non-voting is Sergeant Kevin Rube here. Mr. Bauman.
I'm here.
And then it seems like we have a number of staff as well. It's nice to have you, Councilmember Spence.
Yeah, Councilmember David Spence here. This is my first meeting, and I'm anxious to hear what goes on and report back to the City Council.
Excellent. So preliminary general business, public comment. At this time, any member of the public may address the commission on any subject within the commission's jurisdiction that is not on this meeting's agenda. The Arizona, well, is anybody here that wishes to make public comment? Nope. And great. So moving on to new business.
Okay. I'm gonna let you do that.
You do that.
That's the part that makes me nervous. Like, it's in a file somewhere.
Our first item is the land availability suitability study and code analysis project. A number of staff members will probably introduce themselves. I'm not actually sure who's going to do the presentation tonight, but they'll introduce as they bring this item to you. If I remember right, we talked about this last April or,
Yes,
or
about-
March or April.
It was about
timeframe.
April of 2024, yeah.
Okay, so here we go on our second round.
Okay, so I'm Michelle McNulty. I'm the planning director for the city of Flagstaff. I have Tiffany Antol, zoning code manager, Jennifer Michelson with housing, and Genevieve Parathree with sustainability. We represent the city's internal project team. This is a project that we've been working with a consultant on. As Jeff mentioned, I was here, I think in April of 2024 and gave a presentation on the land availability suitability study and the first part of the CAP project, which is the code diagnostic report. Just a quick overview and reminder of what that conversation was is that the land availability suitability study is basically a land inventory to understand what land do we have left for really focused on residential development and identifying any barriers, including development codes, environmental constraints, and gaps in infrastructure to the development of that land. And then also looking at code, and that means all code that touches development. The next slide will show a list of that, but really making sure that all of those codes are in line with both our housing and our declared climate emergencies. So this is just the list of the different codes and processes that were evaluated during that diagnostic report. And then these were the key barriers that were identified. You can see it's a various amount of things: residential zones, commercial zones, parking requirements, high occupancy housing, zoning map amendment process, subdivision procedures, street width, winter parking, transportation demand management for traffic impact analysis, transportation impact fees, and in this case, the barrier being that we do not charge those fees, street connectivity, sustainable building incentives, as well as the affordable housing incentives and the resource protection overlay. And so kind of moving forward off of that identified list of barriers, we've moved on to the second part of this analysis, which is identifying conceptual codes that help us address these. And so I'm going to turn it over to Tiffany, and she's going to kick us off with that part. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Tiffany Antol, here to present on our code concepts report. I think what is most important as we move through all of this information is there's a lot of different details and a lot of different pieces of code that could be affected or talked about as part of this. What we're really trying to get people's attention on is to focus on outcomes. So again, we're working through our carbon neutrality and our housing attainment goals. Those housing attainment goals are for both affordable housing as well as housing, just general housing production. So I'm going to dive right into this report. If at any point you have any questions, just feel free to interrupt, but we are going to be asking for some feedback through this presentation. I'm going to try to stay high level. The document is out there and available for review. It's pretty dense. I like to say it's like a 10-pound cheese sandwich. If you love code, if you don't love code, you probably don't look at me and say, what am I talking about? But here to help in answering of these questions that you may have. But first and foremost, the code is organized in two different components. The first one focuses on scenarios or different outcomes for changes to most specifically zoning code regulations, things like land use regulations specifically, and the types of housing we allow in each residential zoning district. Maximum density and floor area ratios. I'll dig into this a little bit more as we get through the presentation. Maximum parking requirements, and of course, our existing affordable housing and sustainable building incentives. The code digs in a little further. The code concepts report digs in a little further to some additional issues, including sustainability requirements and incentives, as well as our resource protection overlay, looking at the potential for reduced street widths and maybe handling winter parking ordinance and snow removal a little bit differently. And you'll begin to see the why as we get through this presentation. Overall, the code concepts report methodology include two types of modeling, both economic prototype modeling of different projects based on what type of code change was made. And then also spatial analysis was looked at in order to see if we could move density or encourage density in areas where we know already have low VMT. So reducing transportation related greenhouse gas emissions is a priority for this. Just additionally, there was a level of best practices research done on the other topics. That best practices research did try to focus on cities that were similar in size and condition to Flagstaff. So there's a whole world of literature out there. I don't want to say in any way, shape, or form this is the sum total of everything that can be found on these topics. They're meant to be as closely relatable to Flagstaff as possible. So with all of that said, the key outcomes that we're playing with, these scenarios, they focus around three different sets of outcomes. The first one is working with our existing incentive policies. So we already have incentives for sustainable building design and for affordable housing. So for example, you can add additional density to your project, or you can reduce your parking if you commit to providing a certain percentage of affordable housing units. And those housing units usually have to serve a certain percentage of the area median income resident. So scenario one is all about doubling down on our existing incentives. Right now, those incentives, they're not completely broken. We do have people taking advantage of them, but they're not as used as much as we would like to. And the incentives that we're offering are not as financially beneficial to really encourage the level we'd like to see. So scenario two talks about elevating sustainable design while at the same time increasing market rate housing. This is where we're hitting all of the marks. We're getting closer to our carbon neutrality goals as well as to our housing goals. I would mention that in this scenario, as well as scenario three, they still have an incentive provision. So those incentive provisions will continue throughout. So there's ways to get even more about beyond what these two scenarios are proposing. Scenario three is all about supporting sustainability through density and maximizing market rate housing. So it focuses solely on pretty much increasing housing supply. This is a nice little visualization of the stoplight diagram. I heard you say that this morning, and I was like, oh yeah, that is a stoplight diagram. Take a look. There's lots of great diagrams throughout and it'll sort of tell you for each scenario where's the priority within each of those scenarios. This lovely table also breaks down sort of how each scenario is vetted through our prototype models. Essentially, in scenario one, we make no change to the base code and we only make changes to incentives. Scenario two, we make changes to the base code. We increase by right residential density. We reduce parking requirements by right. And if by right, I mean you can just come in and that is the code requirement. You don't have to give us something in order to achieve those entitlements. And in scenario two, the trade-off is that you would see elevated sustainability standards for projects. So there would be a menu of options that folks could choose from. Scenario three basically replicates what scenario two does, but it doesn't add that elevated sustainability standards. In all three scenarios, there are two things that are always considered as happening. And for the first one is allowing missing middle types, which are considered to be duplex, triplex, fourplex, and townhomes in the R1 zone. There's a recent state bill that was passed that requires us to amend any residential zoning district that allows single-family homes to also allow duplex, triplex, fourplex, and townhomes. It does not, however, require us to change our density requirements. So I, for example, live in the R1 zone on a 9,000 square foot lot. My maximum density is 1 unit per acre. So even if the code is changed to allow a fourplex, I still wouldn't be able to have a fourplex, right? Unless we made other changes in the code. These code changes are moving forward. You'll hear more about them in the upcoming future, but just so you know, some of that parking reduction is coming through some of these state bills that are coming out. Previous to this, there's a change to our allowance for accessory dwelling units. We can no longer require parking spaces or off-street parking spaces for accessory dwelling units, and a property can now have more than one accessory dwelling unit. Same is sort of true for this missing middle housing type. We cannot require more than one parking space for these units. The other is about allowing single-use residential, which is just essentially 100% residential development in commercial zones. We're seeing a lot more sort of commercial infiltration into our existing residential zones with the uptick in short-term rentals. And so, it might be the time to start pushing towards allowing residential projects in our commercial zones, which, by the way, we're seeing a lot of. We're seeing a lot of hotels transition. So what I'm assuming I'm gonna crack a joke. What I'm assuming is gonna happen is our residents are gonna be living in hotels and our tourists are gonna be living in our homes. That is our prediction. That is not a joke, is it? So the report goes into changing densities by scenario for each of the different zoning districts. Just in case you don't know what all of our zoning districts are, when you get towards the yellow end, that's lower density residential. As it turns to darker orange and as it keeps going up, the intensity is increasing. So as the color gets darker, intensity is increasing. So you're getting to medium density, high density. And then, of course, our commercial zones are generally red or pink. You can see here how the density bonuses would change. Again, scenario one really pushes heavy on just implementing or pushing on the boundaries in terms of the incentives, but we would still keep incentives as we do today if we go towards scenario two or three. And also included in this conversation is the idea of adding in floor area ratio standards within residential zoning districts. So up here is the definition of what floor area ratio is. It's like a lot coverage, except it takes into account all floors of the building, so all developable space within the building. So if I had a 3,000 square foot lot and the FAR for that zoning district was 0.5, it would allow a 1,500 square foot home. One of the things that we've faced over time is even though we've been able to figure out how to allow smaller lots, we haven't always gotten smaller homes to go with those lots. And one of the things that we're hearing from the community is that there is a need for starter homes, which are assumed to be much smaller in range than the homes that are currently being produced in our community. So this table shows you the idea of FARs being introduced throughout the zoning categories for residential uses. It could be one of those ways that could help us set sort of the intensity standards for residential development. And parking standards, this table I feel is a little less informative, but essentially it is looking at dramatically reducing parking, either by right or as an incentive. This would be a big change to how we do business today in terms of what, I mean, we are pretty much still the old standby way of parking development in Flagstaff. And then I'm gonna really quickly hand this over to Genevieve.
Good afternoon, Genevieve Pear with the Flagstaff Sustainability Division here at the city. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the sustainability features that this study looked at. So as Tiffany mentioned, they looked at existing code and then looked at different scenarios, scenario 1, 2, and 3. So I'll just go through this table and kind of walk through what that means. So basically, in our existing code, we currently do have some incentives for sustainable design. They're focused on energy efficiency, doing all electric buildings, low water use in indoor as well as outdoor landscaping, materials management during construction primarily, and then encouraging EV charging spaces. So those are for residential development. It can be applied to a larger subdivision, or it can also be applied to a multifamily development. So that's what we have in the existing code. So all the ones that are green in that existing code and that S are those sustainability incentives that we currently have. In scenario 2, those incentives basically stay the same. They just get a little bit more benefits to the developer, but that's what this project looked at. So those same ones are highlighted under scenario 2 in this incentives where you don't change the base code, you just make the incentives a little more enticing. In scenario 2, that's the one where the base code changes. So as Tiffany mentioned, the density goes up, the parking requirements go down. And then as part of that, developers can choose from a menu of sustainability options. So we have a points-based system for our planned residential development that Tiffany took that a code amendment through a little while ago. So that's kind of the idea where maybe would have to get a certain number of points, for example, and different features could give different points. We don't know what that would look like yet, but that's kind of the general idea. So in that scenario, the base code, the sustainability features that people could choose from expand beyond what we have now. So having on-site solar, for example, could be an option, using more sustainable materials, secure bike parking, transit. So some of them do have to do with transportation demand management. A lot of them also have to do with the building and what energy source it is and how it's constructed. So that's what scenario 2 looks like. It also has some, those incentives apply across the board. And then in scenario 3, they only, not incentives, excuse me, the menu of items that people would choose from. And then going back to scenario 3, it goes back to just having the sustainability features as incentives, but not the base code. So again, this is pretty high level. These are just a lot of things that other cities do that the consultant looked at in this project. The consultant also looked at carbon emissions modeling. They did do some spatial stuff with transportation, but this part of it's focused on emissions from buildings. So they looked at different sources of carbon emissions, as well as things that buildings can do or site design can do to kind of take out, sequester carbon emissions or emit fewer. So basically, a couple sources of carbon emissions from buildings, embodied carbons that comes from building materials, electricity, so that's associated with the production, energy production needed to create electricity in the grid. Fossil fuel emissions, that's from on-site natural gas use. And then refrigerant emissions are from any refrigerant leaks from heating and cooling. And on the other side of the scale, biogenic carbon storage that actually takes carbon outside of the atmosphere. And then avoided energy emissions are basically if we use less energy, we emit fewer emissions. So those are ways that we reduce the emissions from buildings. And no surprise, the scenario 2, where the base code has that menu of options people can choose from, that one had the biggest reductions in carbon emissions over a 30-year period. As you can also see on this chart, the yellow, where basically projects that use incentives, they also have a reduced amount of carbon emissions compared to developments that don't use the current incentives that we have. So basically, we can see that the incentives do work to bring down buildings' carbon emissions over time, and that if we incorporate some that menu of options into the base code, then the opportunity is even bigger to reduce emissions from buildings. And that is all I have. I'll pass it back to Tiffany. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Genevieve. This is one of the last slides on the scenarios. And really, we were looking at what is the total capacity for net new units within the city, and it gives you an estimated number under each scenario. So staying in the status quo, you can see, we're in the 47,000 range of net new units. And this, of course, comes hand in hand with our land availability suitability, site suitability study, which looks at what vacant lands we have left to develop and their zoning and infrastructure issues. But then also scenario 1, 2, and 3, you can see build on each other, getting to the highest number of net new units with scenario 3. The key findings from these scenarios is the first and foremost, the codes are only a small part of the issue. The existing development environment in Flagstaff is already extremely challenging. I know I'm delivering a big surprise, right? The cost of land, the cost of labor, the cost of materials, they're pretty significant and we don't have any impact on those. But the prototype modeling does show that there is beneficial impact with offsetting with some of these codes, specifically in terms of density and parking reductions. Scenario 1 presents a viable option for increasing the attractiveness of our incentive programs. It is, however, the higher risk strategy for increasing housing production and achieving carbon neutrality. So it's probably the easiest to implement. It has the less risk legally in terms of Prop 207 claims, where we have to worry about if we change standards and lower somebody's property value, we may have to offset the cost or waive a standard. So there's a very specific legal framework that we have to work around in the state of Arizona. So in terms of risks, scenario 1 doesn't get us all the way to what we were hoping, but it has the lowest risk legally. Scenario 2 that shows us that there's a viable opportunity to elevate sustainability standards for all new developments, so long as we offset with the economic benefit of increased density and lower parking. Scenario 3, the same. We can elevate and improve housing outcomes. And then across all of the scenarios, parking reduction was critical. Whether it was for the incentives or for buy rate development, it was critical to the market feasibility, especially of higher density prototypes. We did look at that spatial analysis. So they looked at our zoning districts and where in areas that we already had low VMT. What came out of that was that there's no one zoning district that works best. And if we want to concentrate density on, say, a transit corridor, we would need to look at doing targeted rezonings, adding a new overlay zone, or doing proximity-based zoning, something like a transit-oriented development zoning code. Also, if the policy goal is to broadly increase density throughout the community, of course, scenario 2 and 3 are the most effective approach. So this is sort of the feedback we're looking for from you all. I do not expect you to have any levels of answers or anything tonight. If you have any initial feelings and thoughts about what this all looks like, great. If you need additional time to absorb this, if you need us to come back and talk about this more, if you want to email us or email your commission liaison with your thoughts on this process, we'd be happy to accept them. We were at council last night just diving into this, and we expect to come back to them in hopes of sort of conglomerating all of the information from different commissions about what the outcomes are we're looking to see. So there are 3 outcomes: keeping the status quo for by right development and making existing incentives more appealing and financially beneficial. Requiring sustainable building practices for development, but offsetting any potential impact with additional by right development allowances. And then the third one is supporting sustainability by promoting market rate housing production. So, generally, if in your thoughts and feelings, what you think is the right best outcome for achieving the goals that we're already working with under, we'd love to know. And then, are there any zoning districts that should not be included or treated differently? When we talk about this, a lot of people interact and respond much more with single family homes, and I think that that's because that's the home type that they live in, rather than maybe. And so I think we talk to a lot more people in that sort of situation, and that's their reference points, rather than talking about what the needs are for multifamily. They are very two distinct different things, and we might have different needs for the zoning districts in order to achieve the different things that different types of housing needs throughout different zoning districts. And then, do you support moving forward with substantial parking reductions? If you do, should parking be left to the developer to determine? Do we let the market determine how much parking is necessary? If we move forward with substantial parking reductions, is it important that we address our issues with on-street parking? So currently, because of snow, we don't allow overnight parking 5 months of the year, which really doesn't allow us as planners to work with developers and include on-street parking. We do, however, require not all of our streets, we do require all of our residential streets, for the most part, to include on-street parking. And then, should by right density increases be limited to areas that have low VMT? Is that the best route to go, or should we be looking at making these changes citywide? And then I'm going to delve into the next code concept, so you can kind of start to see why we're getting into some of these features. The first up is the sustainability and transportation demand management requirements. So this is talking about adopting a menu or a points-based approach for a developer to pick through in order to implement these sustainability features. So there are some things that the state has prohibited us from requiring. We cannot require all electric development, for example, which is kind of important to getting to carbon neutrality by 2030. But we could adopt a code that has it on the menu of items that a developer could choose from. And so a developer could come in and say, this makes best sense for my project, and they could go all electric and get their level of points and move on the way. Another developer, based on their project, could pick a different set of standards. Included in this would be adding more transportation demand management items. Those are currently not included, in our sustainability incentives. So the consultants have come back and said this should be a critical component of the menu. Our resource protection overlay is a code right now that applies to most of the vacant land currently in the city. It was applied in 1990. It requires the protection of floodplains, steep slopes, and for entry resources, and specifically in that order. The development of the resource protection standards back in the 90s really focused on putting the heaviest requirements on residential zone properties. So the preservation requirements fall on the specific zoning district and not on the specific land use. So for example, if you build a residential project in a commercial zone, you meet the lower commercial zone standards. where if you build a residential project in a residential zone, you're meeting a higher preservation requirement. And the difference so it's 50% tree resources for residential zones. It is 20 to 30% in commercial and industrial zones. It's actually 30% even in open space zones. So residential carries the burden of preserving the most amount of resources. The consultant took a look at this. They've come up with some suggestions. I would tell you overall, we continue to work and tinker, and there's a lot of things going on with our resource protection overlay. We have a very involved fire department at the moment who would like us to do a lot of work in this area. We all realize and understand the importance of why the resource protection overlay was adopted. It just needs to be recalibrated for today, and it needs to focus on the fact that we're no longer trying to we're no longer trying to assume that wildfires we can actually stop them. We are trying to figure out how we can live through them instead. So that's where I think we're going to see the big focal change happening in our resource protection overlay. Next up is reduced street widths. So the code concept reports does propose some new options for narrower street designs that would allow slightly higher density for some development types. And it's specifically for single family residential and the development of subdivisions, but a smaller street section could allow for some higher densities. It's one of the things it's one of the many overlapping issues that gets hard to get density maximums out of single family residential zones. The big issue here is our fire code. So our street width standards currently have been based off of fire code standards. They were increased in width 6 years ago, based on adoption of the most current fire code. So there's a lot of work we need to do in order to even go in this direction and to have this conversation. There's a lot of work we would need to do with our fire department. It may mean that we would need different equipment. It may mean that we would need different staff. But we're looking to see if people are interested in us pursuing this topic. In terms of reducing street widths overall, there's other potential benefits in terms of reducing the cost of development, but also potentially calming traffic speeds as well. We have a long history of different street widths in Flagstaff. So wherever you go, you will find a street of a different width. It's sort of a nice, interesting patchwork quilt, but we definitely at one point in time allowed private street sections that were much, much smaller than we allow today. So all of our public streets have to meet private street standards. So it's definitely one of the things that has limited some levels of flexibility and creativity and design of single family developments. The last one up is our winter parking ordinance. If we're gonna dial down on the parking requirements on site, do we want to look at getting back to allowing on-street parking all year round? If we do that, that means we have to manage snow removal differently. There's definitely probably going to be cost involved in this. There's also probably a different level of expectation management in terms of service delivery. It could alter the way we deliver this service in the future. It feels like an odd year to be talking about this because there's been no snow. So seems great this year. I don't want to get everybody super excited, like, oh, it's not a problem this year, but we know in other years it's not been good. And I would say that our public works team does a great job of dealing with this. Public works and Parks and Rec do an amazing job in terms of dealing with the snow removal process. This is like probably one of the toughest jobs in Flagstaff there is on those days when it happens. And so, we want to make sure that no matter where we go in terms of these concepts and these ideas, that we're working with our partners, that they're on board and that they're willing to move forward. But if we're not able to get to a place where we can adequately accommodate parking year round on street, maybe we can reconsider our street width standards that are requiring on-street parking. So there's just some overlaps. I mean, again, we've been asked to dig in the barrel and figure out what's what's causing some tensions between certain things. But it's clear to us that we can move the mark if we reduce parking standards, but we want to be proactive in dealing with any potential side effects or outcomes of reducing on-site parking. And with that, just, do you support the concept of a points-based sustainability requirement? Do you support seeing changes to resource protection overlay? Would you want us to delve into coming up with a strategy for looking at narrower street designs? And the same for winter snow parking ordinance. Like, are these things that we need to continue to pursue in the next phase of the project? So public outreach. Initially, our public outreach was very focused on reaching out to people who are using our code on a regular basis. So developers and engineers to figure out what those barriers were in the first place. Now we're at this high level code concepts. We want to figure out what outcomes people want us to achieve because there's lots of ways to get to the goals that we've been tasked to implement. So what outcome do we want to get to? How do we want to get there? And then really getting into our next round of this project, which is having the developer come up with the formal code recommendations. I'll just tell you, this morning we were talking with the consultants after the level of discussions we've had so far. They can feel that, generally there's been a lot of comments positive towards increasing density. Nobody's been quite as vocal as about reducing parking maybe, but they feel very confident that in this next round they can start to show us strategically through an additional set of models what it looks like if we increase density but we don't change parking. So there's a lot more study to be done and a lot more work to be done. Even with these final code recommendations, they don't change code. We have to go through that very fun, laborious process of changing the code itself. So there's still a lot of things getting us to that finish line and across the board, but we're looking for your help and your feedback and however best that we, because again, this is a lot of detailed information and we're talking in a lot of specific language. So if there's ways that we can help break this down, if there's additional information that you need, we can be at the ready to help resolve that, but we would also appreciate your feedback on this. And I can stop talking now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for that presentation and for all the work that you've been doing. Are there any questions from the Transportation Commission?
Should model the different types and the density of the trees on lots and fire? Have they done that? With the changing, with the way what's happened in the last few years with fires in and around the Southwest?
Yeah, so we are actively working with our fire department right now. Our Wildland Fire Protection Plan was just recently readopted, which helps us determine how best to thin properties, but it was also updated to include best practices for WUI situations. So, keeping trees 5 to 10 feet away from structures, how to create defensible space and other provisions. So that part of the work has been elevated and was recently completed and approved by council in December. The fire department is very eager to dive into the resource protection overlay standards so that we can assure that we're trying to create developments that will survive wildfire in the future. So it's coming. We're working on it every day.
Thank you.
I was wondering, Tiffany, if you wouldn't mind going through like a parking example for for the commissioners that might get a little more real for them. I
Sure.
was following your table kind of, and I do this not really for a living, but I kind of understand it. So maybe walking through kind of what a site looks like today, whatever you pick, townhouse, single family, something might get more real.
Sure. And this table takes into account sort of, it's a gross scenario. It's not, right? We know that different land uses have different parking requirements. The one that is 100% our code is in the commercial, the one parking space per 300 gross square feet. But our residential parking is a little bit more complicated. So when I first started working at the city 152 years ago, no, I haven't worked here as long as Jeff. When I first started working at the city, a single family residential home required 2 off-street parking spaces. That could be in your garage, and that could be in your driveway. So technically, if you had a garage and a driveway, you had 4 parking spaces because you can do tandem for single family. Over time, we ran into issues where we were seeing the development of single family homes that were much different. They were 5, 6 bedrooms, 7, 8 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms. They had a different occupancy level to them. And so over time, our parking standards changed. So it started out that, so then as we noticed, unit sizes getting much larger, we changed our parking standards. I would say that too was pretty common throughout for most residential units. We started it like if you were 2 to 3 bedroom, you were that 2 units or that 2 parking spaces. And I would say that was pretty much the same whether you're multifamily or single family. Then we started tinkering with multifamily as the units got bigger. So then as the bedrooms increased, so did the requirement for parking. And in multifamily projects, in addition, you've got to provide guest parking. So, and then over time, we also changed that standard for single family. So, if you have a 5, 6 bedroom home, you could be providing upwards of 4 to 5 parking spaces for that home. So that's been the change over the 10 years that I've been here. But overall, so even though we've gone, I guess, against the world outside, we've only increased our parking requirements because what we've seen is an increase in unit size. This looks at pushing us back down away from what that would look like. So in this situation, if you had um, if you had a 3-bedroom unit, you're looking at basically just doing 1.75 spaces on a multifamily project. You'd be looking at doing, so 1.75 is what they figure out our average is now, even though it's much more complicated than that, and I rambled on about it. Dropping that potentially down to 1.25. So you're seeing a differential, when you're looking at maybe 1.25 spaces. So let me do some simple math. So 5 units. 5-unit project. Jeff doesn't even know how many times we've done this presentation and how tired we all are. So 5 units at 5.25 is 6.25 parking spaces required. We do round. It's 6.25 or is it 5.2? Yeah, 6.25. Yeah, 6.25. We would round down, so you would be required to have 6 parking spaces. But take 1.75 times 5, and you can see the differential that would be there. Parking is just such an interesting thing. It is, if you park it, they'll come. If you don't park it, they'll generally figure out a way to irritate somebody else with their car. So I'm not sure what the answer is. I mean, I was a college student in San Francisco, and clearly parking was not a priority in San Francisco. And if you had a car, you got rid of it really soon because it was too much to manage. But you also didn't need it because you had a compact city that was walkable and that you had great transit. So, if you really push people hard in terms of other alternatives, they'll start to look for other alternatives. They'll realize what the difficulty is and the responsibility of owning that vehicle. So there is that philosophy out there, right? If we push the mark, but I'm assuming it'll be a little messy in the interim. So there's the long and short of that. I mean, these are dramatic parking drops for us, so. And I will say that our transportation division is definitely the division that hears about on-street parking a lot. I only get maybe 2 calls every so often. I mean, I recently had a phone call where somebody had somebody parking in front of their house and it made their dogs bark and their kids were home by themselves and that was scary for them and it was scary for their kids. And could I do anything about it? And it's a public street that somebody spent a lot of money to put that parking on. And so it's hard to have those conversations. It's hard for all of us. But it's definitely one of the issues out there. I also recently saw an email with concerns about it was parking in Upper Greenlaw. And I walk Upper Greenlaw on the regular. I think I saw 4 whole cars parked on the street. And I was like, well, it's a matter of perception, right? So unfortunately, we can't make everybody happy all the time, but we do our best. And I will say that transportation does carry the burden of all of that. So there you go. Yeah, jump in.
I just wanted to add to, we were talking a little bit with the consultant this morning about, if they modeled density but not reducing parking, like what that looks like, and that would probably push developments to do a lot of podium parking, like parking garages basically, which I think are like 30 grand per space. Something like that. Yeah. And then thinking about just the cost of parking, if we did that, yeah, that adds a lot of cost to development. And then just surface spaces, I think is like 3 to 5 grand, depending on where you are. So there's a lot of larger conversations about the costs of development and things that raise costs and things that lower costs. So I think that's just an important thing to consider in this parking discussion because it does add a lot of costs. It's not everything costs something, right? But just thinking about are there opportunities to lower costs as part of this conversation too? So thanks.
Yeah, it's an interesting problem that you guys have to deal with. I think the hard thing to think about with all this stuff is maybe this is my cynical view. I've only been in Flagstaff for 10 years, but it seems like we have this idea of like a nice ideal market where like if people don't want something that developers build, that developers build something else. But it seems like they're just going to build like the cheapest thing they can for the most money and pack out whatever they can, and then people will deal with it because there's no other options. And so when I see like a list of a lot of options for sustainability, I wonder how those will be utilized by developers, or if developers will just figure out that for those that are the most cost effective for them to do to get what they need to maximize their profit, and then just do all those ones.
Yeah, good question. That's something that we've definitely talked about too. The report does have a table looking at not exact costs, but based on some national studies about what different sustainability features cost, and it is on the conservative side just because they're modeling, I kind of assume the highest cost. But I will say that, and we're looking actually to try to get better data for Flagstaff too, to get a better understanding, because that's something we hear all the time is what is the cost of requiring an all electric building, for example. And I think that's where that larger conversation comes in. And it's like, well, some studies actually found that it's cheaper to build a new electric building than a dual fuel gas and electric. And so if that's the case, and then if you also reduce parking, reduce those costs, you know what I mean? So that's why we're trying to look at it more holistically. But anyway, so in the report, they are looking at the costs of some features versus a single family home versus multifamily, and finding that some may add costs, but it might depend on whether it's single family or multifamily. So it's also economy of scale thing too. And while some features not actually adding any costs, but finding that almost all of them have cost savings over time in terms of operation of buildings. So definitely a complicated question that's on a lot of people's minds. I think that's where I think I would say it's helpful for me to think about the sustainability features as being perhaps stuff having to do with the building and the building energy and energy efficiency. And actually, yeah, here's the table here. But you can see on here too, some of them also have to do with transportation. And so thinking about it as a larger menu. So the carbon neutrality plan looks at reducing greenhouse gas emissions from buildings and transportation. So there could be different options that developers could choose from that can all contribute to lower greenhouse gas emissions. So I hear what you're saying, but I think it's like it's kind of complicated in terms of how much stuff actually costs. And I do think too, just looking at the fuller picture, some things might go up a little bit, but maybe other things make them go down a lot, so then maybe it pencils out. And I will say too, um, some of the places that have reduced or removed their minimum parking requirements are still getting a lot of development, but they offer kind of, again, that menu to offset that and do transportation demand management. So anyway, I think it's complicated. But we do see this working in other communities. And then just one thing I want to add to, I was at a forum where someone said, let's stop talking about these as sustainability design features and just say this is just good construction practice, which I think is true. We think about them as being more sustainable, but really we're going to be living in these buildings for 50, maybe 100 years. So the decisions we make now can just be good construction practices. So just one final note there. But I'm happy to answer any other questions if you have them.
So would any zoning changes encourage density around the current permanent transit network?
Yes, I'll maybe let Tiffany jump up, but I think that's an option. One of the questions is where, do these changes go kind of across zones across the city, or do we target them towards the permanent transit network? Another question is, transit goes where there's density. So there's also something to be said for building density where we want transit to go to. Do you want to add anything to that, Tiffany? Cool. And Tiffany says, what did you say about parking spaces? Okay. So Tiffany did the math, and on a 5-unit apartment complex, it would go from 9 required spaces potentially to 2. And obviously, if that's something that council does direct us to move forward with and exploring that, they can look at calibrating that. So it's not like we're choosing a number, it's more looking at the larger outcome of, do we want to explore reducing parking spaces?
Yeah, I think I like the idea of reducing parking spaces, but sort of my concern is this sort of building on what I said before, right? Of where developers going to do what developers going to do. And as a citizen, once, like you have a limited option for apartments, and it's also hard to do a lot of stuff in this town without a car, potentially, like we have a nice transit system depending on where you are. And so if we allow 2 parking spots for a 6-unit apartment building, I imagine we'll have a lot of people parking everywhere, which is going to make a lot of other people unhappy. And is that solving our problem, or is that not solving our problem? Yeah, I'm not providing any help here, but just commiserating on the challenge of choosing the
That's
appropriate
okay.
one.
And I do think too, it seems like places that have gotten rid of their minimums and allow the market to dictate that, it's not like they're necessarily providing no parking either. So I think that's just something to think about, that if you reduce those minimum parking requirements, it doesn't mean that there will be no parking, most likely, if you have that provision for the market to provide for that as well. So I think there's just a lot of different ways to do it. So it's really like, is that a general direction we want to explore?
I would like to throw in an intended consequence, as opposed to, you usually hear of unintended consequences as a bad outcome, but how about this for an intended consequence? For people like myself who think the maximum population density in our mountain town shouldn't be, let's say, over 100,000. You could pick a 100, if you want to pick 150,000 as your maximum density. In other words, your mindset is, we don't want to be a 300 to 400,000 metropolis here in the mountain. So if you pick a modest growth over 50 years or 100 years, this conversation about eliminating parking spaces requirement and forcing people to park on the street, it has the intended consequence of limiting the number of people that would want to move here. I mean, if they want to have 4 cars and they'll pick someplace else to live. So I look at that as an intended consequence, and I don't know how many people think population growth, unrestrained population growth is a problem, but I do. So I just offer that as an intended good downstream effect of reducing parking requirements.
Yeah, I think the complicated thing is people want quality of life, right? And so like that's why there's a part of me that I like to bike everywhere and I would prefer to walk, or I wish our transit system were better. And so I would like it if we had less parking and a more compact city that had less traffic. But you know, not everybody has the choice of where they are at every point in their life. And for a lot of people that have to do certain types of jobs in this community, you know, it's like if you're a house cleaner for Airbnb rentals, like you need a car to get around, and you may not be able to afford your own house, and you may have to live, you know, and so it's um, I'm afraid that, you know, the problem we have right now is if we don't do anything, then we build at a slower rate, which may sound nice, but then prices go up, and so you still price a lot of people out, you know, and like unfortunately it doesn't seem like there's an end where people realize, oh, this is we're harming the other people in this community, and maybe we should shift things until it's like way too late. Um, but yeah, are there any other comments from members of the commission? Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for the presentation you've given many times. Um, I'm not sure you got a lot of clear feedback, but I guess less parking sounds nice, but how do we manage this and make sure it's a livable town for all of us?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up, David Lemke is going to talk about the residential management guide that we've been running since 2012 with probably a few updates. This is more of a major update. He's going to run through his proposed changes, our proposed changes. We don't have new code written yet, but we'll come back with that at the next meeting if we like the changes or however we modify these changes. So take it away.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Chair Koenig. Thank you, Transportation Commission. Thank you, Council Member Spence, for being here. My name is David Lemke. I'm a transportation engineer for the city. And today we will be going over the residential traffic management guide updates. Let me go ahead and get this into slideshow. Okay. So since 2012, the city has maintained a residential traffic management program. The purpose of this program is for citizens to be able to come in and assist for concerns such as noise, speeding, and pedestrian comfort. The goals of our updates are as follows: to revise the thresholds of the program to focus on and address the worst issues in the city, and to improve the processing timelines for improved community, commission, and staff efficiency. For some background, there's no dedicated budget for residential traffic calming projects. Projects can be or become expensive if infrastructure changes are required. The Boulder Point Woodland Drive traffic calming project, for example, cost approximately $500,000 to complete, and that was last year. Traffic calming projects are time intensive and require significant commitment from neighborhoods, the commission, and staff under the current program. And these are all things that we want to try to address with the threshold changes or the changes to the guide. This is just an example of traffic calming. This is the Boulder Point traffic circle. Just give an idea of what some of these projects can look like. For more background, 15 projects have qualified for traffic calming in the past 5 years, for an average of 3 projects qualifying for traffic calming per year. Of that mix, only 2 were local roads that qualified. The rest were minor and major collectors. So we're starting to get a better idea of which roads people are most concerned about and which ones are qualifying with our current thresholds. More background, there was one serious injury crash recorded in all the locations that qualified for traffic calming. It was a bicyclist-related crash on Lockett Road. It should also be noted that Lockett Road is a major collector that carries 8,000 average daily traffic, which is approximately 4 times greater than the average traffic for the other qualifying projects. What this is telling us is that by and large, the qualifying projects don't have a history of severe crashes, or in some cases, no crashes at all. If there are crashes, they're usually property damage only. And we notice that some cities, like the city of Boulder, have discontinued their neighborhood speed management program to prioritize efforts on high traffic arterials in the line of Vision Zero sort of efforts to try to address serious crashes and get those under control before they go out into a broader arena of engineering practices. The existing thresholds, so this is areas of improvement, are multifaceted and are difficult for the public to understand. They can include things like speeds, excessive volumes, but also pedestrian generators, nearness to a school, nearness to a bus stop, things like this. There's many different parts of it, and it can be hard to identify change after a traffic calming project has been implemented. The existing process relies on staff to collect neighborhood support and approval, and staff recommends adjusting thresholds and changing how neighborhood approval is collected. So talking about thresholds, we suggest taking our multifaceted thresholds and reducing them down to these thresholds here, which would be divided into road classification. You have minor collectors, and minor collectors, and they have to meet these criteria that the 85th percentile speed would be greater than 32 miles per hour, and the portion of vehicles traveling more than 5 miles above the speed limit would be greater than 30%. That would be our cutoff point for ones that would qualify and ones that wouldn't. And local roads, the 85th percentile speed would be greater than 30 miles per hour, and the portion of vehicles traveling more than 5 miles per hour above the speed limit is greater than 30%. This kind of aligns with the idea on minor collectors, typically the speed limit is 25. So if people are going faster than 30, that's where we're starting to draw a line. They're like, okay, that's something that we're not comfortable with or we don't want to accept. And we've chosen 30% as the threshold that if there's that many people, that's where we're going to go and address it. So just to give you more context for how we got to these numbers, these are all the projects in the past 5 years, all 15 of them. And honestly, we are a little bit beyond capacity to address all the projects that have come to us, and they do take a long time as well. And we also don't have the dedicated budget. So we do have a lot of projects in the queue and a lot of people waiting for these types of projects. And we wanted to address the thresholds to make sure we're focusing on like the worst cases in the city first, because we have limited resources and because we have limited budget. And this is an example of how we drew a line to separate some from the others based on speed. And this is the percent of vehicles traveling greater than 5 miles per hour above the speed limit. This is the other metric, the 85th percentile speed. And this one shows the same thing. Those two correlate a lot, the 85th percentile speed and the percent driving more than 5 above the speed limit. And it's just a way for us to focus in on the ones that have the worst speeding issues. Measurable difference. So an example of how these thresholds could be more applicable to the public, like once we go in and do a project and show them the results. These are 4 different examples where we've gone and done traffic improvements. The first one is on University Avenue when we first tried to do medians with candlesticks, and we saw the percentage of vehicles traveling more than 5 miles above the speed limit cut in half. And that like statistic speaks more volumes than the 85th percentile statistic does. Like when we did that same project, the 85th percentile speed dropped by 2 miles per hour, which didn't seem like a lot. But when you look at it through a different context, it was significant. And then when you compare it to the circles, you see there's like a strata of like different options. The circles were much more expensive, but they had a much bigger impact on the people traveling more than 5 miles per hour above the speed limit. And even the Fremont Art Project saw a significant reduction in the people traveling more than 5 miles above the speed limit. So we think that this could be a better way to communicate to the public a better way to choose projects that need to be addressed and a better way to show improvement once we've done an improvement. I also want to highlight radar feedback signs because they are a cheaper alternative. They're typically around $5,000 to $4,000 to install. And they do have impacts on the 85th percentile speed, the mean speed, all these things that can help make the road more comfortable and address the issues that the citizens are bringing forward. So I'm going to dive into the approval process. So currently, it's a little unclear in the process where the boundary area is drawn, like for the project. And I want to make it in this revision very clear that it's drawn in the beginning. When someone comes forward with a complaint, we sit down and figure out, okay, this is the area that's going to be affected. These are the people who will need to get approval from. Because these projects are based mostly on citizen concerns and like citizen comfort. They're not as much rooted in like crosswalk analysis, where if you have a certain number of people crossing, like we would put a crosswalk in, the speed is tied to our thresholds, but it's also tied to neighborhood approval. And so we want to draw the boundary so that we can be specific on who we need to get approval from. Because in the past, we didn't have the strictest neighborhood approval and some people would be divided. Some people would really like the project, some people wouldn't. And sometimes we'd get a good way down the road with a certain improvement and half the neighborhood would come out and say no, and then we have to start over. So we want to avoid that, save like the tax money and be as efficient with our time as we can. So the requesting citizen would be responsible for collecting signatures from 65% of residents in the boundary area, like for approval. And if it meets in the boundary area to initiate traffic data collection. So there's two steps. You collect the signatures for data collection. You also get emails then. So you have like a pool of people who are interested in the project, want to do it. And then once you find a solution, you go back to them and get their approval again, just to make sure we don't run into that problem of half the neighborhood wanting one thing, half the neighborhood wanting something else. So our recommendations as a summary is to update the thresholds and update the approval requirements and citizen involvement. We request your feedback tonight and direction on the proposed changes, and we take that and adjust our current document, resubmit it to you to review, and then approve it. We'll be returning in the April Transportation Commission meeting with that updated document. And with that, I will close it out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lemke. Any comments or feedback from the commissioners? All right, I'll jump in. So thanks so much for putting those numbers together. And I think this is, to your point, one of those interesting projects where, you know, we have citizen complaints and we're trying to improve them, but there's not a clear need always. I think it's very fortunate that we don't have more accidents for bike and ped in this city, but that does, you know, like if you have those accidents, then that certainly sets priority. My only concern is without that, like what are we missing in close calls and how many people are just not participating because something's too dangerous, you know, which is not in alignment with the council's previous direction on the carbon neutrality plan and the goal of trying to get an increased number of people walking and biking in the city.
If I could, I really appreciate that, Chair. And I've thought that as well. Like this project is very much citizen, or this guide, this program is very much citizen led. Like they come forward with like complaints, and that's where we'll go to identify problems and try to come up with a solution. And like you said, like just because there's not bicyclist crashes doesn't mean that it's like necessarily ideal for bicyclists. It could be that people are uncomfortable and they don't want to use the facilities as they are. And I've always thought that it could be more powerful to focus on those more specifically, especially for bicyclists. And in a way, we do that. Like that's through the active transportation management guide, and that's another reason why through this program we're trying to narrow it down. And direct people, if they do have more of a bicyclist pedestrian concern, to the AT&P, and keeping this for the specific concerns of citizens related mostly to speed and volumes.
And what I liked is you had two great charts there that showed all 15 projects in order of both the metrics you had chosen. And so do we need to change the ranking, or do we just change the strategy where you pick one of those and you say, we're just gonna, the next one's gonna be whatever ranks the most on this. And then the next one's gonna be whatever ranks the most on this. And so if one of them goes up there and it's low down on the list, it could stay on the list, indefinitely, I guess. How long until we redo traffic analysis on it?
Sure. That's a concern that we've had as well, and that's another reason why we want to have the tighter thresholds so we don't have as many projects coming in, because there are a few that have been sitting waiting for a solution for a while. And so typically when we do these, we do them as a first come, first serve basis, because they would typically come in chunks. Like they'd come like one at a time throughout the year. And we try our best to address them. And as we'd make progress, another one would come in, and then like we'd get kind of bogged down by that. So I believe, or we believe, that with the new thresholds, we'll be able to complete the ones that we have, and then hopefully only get 1 to 2 projects a year instead of 3 to 4. And that'll make it more manageable. And also make it so we can get to them in a timely manner. Because that's another thing. These do take time. And the goal of addressing the guide is to save the staff time so that we can complete the ones that have the biggest need, or like have the worst conditions, in the most time efficient manner possible.
So we are still proposing to address them kind of first in and just keep working through. But you were starting it on a different path where you'd kind of rank them, or were you asking if that was our proposal? I wasn't quite sure.
I think my suggestion would be to rank them, right? So instead of doing them first come, if our concern is addressing the biggest issue, then, and we have these charts where we've ranked them already, would it make sense to then address the ones, obviously if they're close within a couple percent, maybe that doesn't change, but if we're about to start one and one comes in at 10% higher, it certainly seems like you want to work on that one first.
Yes, I think that's something that we will discuss as we bring forward the one, how we address the ones that are in our queue currently, and how we'll address the ones that come after them. Ideally, I think we would get to a point where when projects come in, if and when because we're kind of seeing a pattern that if we use these thresholds, we'd get 1 to 2 a year, and we'd be able to address them as they come. But until we do, we should find a way to prioritize them. And I think it's fair to go with the ones that have the worst conditions and start from there and go to the rest. So we can write that into the guide, or just commit to doing that like for the program. And then once it's clearing out the ones that are lingering, then maybe we stick with like first come, first serve and see how it goes. It might be a dynamic process, or maybe we just stick with the rating. I'll have to talk to Jeff and see what like kind of might fit best.
One of the other things about this whole process, right, I think is it helps for the citizens to feel like they're voices being heard and their concerns are being heard. And I think council probably likes it because then they can say, hey, go, before you come and complain to council, go through this process over here, you know? And so I think it could be useful to make some of this information more easily available, to say like, hey, here's the current list of projects. We've done speed analysis on these. You know, these don't meet the current speed analysis and, you know, therefore can't be addressed for another 5 years or something.
And we do that to an extent. We have online a list of the ongoing projects, and we have like linked to the guide. And typically, when citizens do come either to council or to us, we will let them know like we do have more projects in the queue. Like you're here. There's a whole list of other ones that didn't qualify, and a lot of those are the local roads because a lot of our local roads, they're designed for 25 miles per hour, and that is usually reflected. Usually it's less. It's like 24, 23 for the 85th percentile speed, and the mean speed is really low. So it does help in that sense of a way for the citizens to feel heard and also to identify places where speeding is a little bit beyond the comfort threshold for the environment.
Well, that's awesome. You're already doing it.
Yeah, we're getting there. Yeah, I think the goal for me, big one, was just to make it more streamlined, make the thresholds easier to understand, and refine the process so that it does become more citizen-led with more neighborhood buy-in, so that we avoid confusion as we go through the projects, because these can become expensive if we decide to go with circles, or if we decide to go to curb extensions, and it's better for everybody if the neighborhood's on board.
So right now, to get signatures, you guys mail things out?
No, right now we create an online survey, and we usually save that until the solution is chosen. And then we draw a boundary, and then we mail out postcards to those places. So a little more time intensive on the staff side. And it's tough because we'll mail out those postcards and we might not hear anything back. And I've gone and knocked on some doors, and we try to get the citizens to be the ones to go do that, but it's hard to motivate them sometimes. So that was another reason why I wanted to change the code to make it explicit. Like, oh, like you want this project, you know, like the neighborhood wants it, you're excited about it. Like you need to garner the support for it, just like you would for coming to council. And in the original plan, also to get the speed study done, which also takes time, they only need 5 signatures from just anybody on the street, which I felt wasn't enough. We should create the boundary first. Like, okay, this is our study area. These are the people who will be affected. These are the people you need to ask. Like, first, just to see if they even want some sort of speed address. Because if you can't get the approval in the beginning, you're not going to get the approval after the speed study either. So that was our vision with that.
Yeah, and I wonder if there's just like a hybrid approach, because it seems like it's nice to mail out postcards. you
Yeah,
know, and so maybe something along the lines of, you guys mail postcards out, but then it's their you know, like their
They need to
partner
get
with you,
those.
so you can let them know who didn't respond, and they can go and
Yep.
knock on those doors
on
if
the
they
doors.
want to.
I think that's fair, and like I'll talk to Jeff about that. But yes, hybrid approach for neighborhood approval. I think the initial getting the traffic data collection should be more explicit for them, but once they've done that, like they have the email addresses, it's easier for us to step in as well. But what were you gonna say, Jeff?
I was just going to support that. Yeah, postcards are not a big deal. We're just not getting people to respond.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, it's easy for us to create a mailing list, super easy to print them and have them shipped, but then we get like no response. So that's part of this as well, is we need people on the ground. And David's been the guy on the ground knocking on doors twice. He goes back again. It's like, okay, we can't spend this much time trying to get someone to respond. We need to activate the neighbors that are interested in the project. So yeah, I like the hybrid though. That's a good suggestion.
agreed.
Yeah. Cool. And the only other thing is, you know, this, I feel like this question, I forget what we came to last time this topic came up, but when you can't get signatures, what's the right amount of people? Like, is it 65% of responses that are like positive, or 65% of total? How many of these are second homeowners or Airbnbs, you know, and like that might change by neighborhood. And so like, what's a what's a fair thing to do if people don't, if they choose not to be active in that process?
We found like when we looked at other cities, they do 65% of the total. So like they do have a pretty hard line of getting that neighborhood approval, mostly because a lot of other places also fund these projects. And they put that there to make sure that the money is going to be well spent, like that they do have the neighborhood buy-in. But I do understand the concern with the second homes. We've kept our we've tried to keep our boundary areas small. Like in the last iteration, it was like 30 houses was kind of the max. The last project that we've done the boundaries for was only like 4 houses. It was very small, so much easier to get those people's approval and much more straightforward. Like, is this going to work or is will it not? Um, so I'd say our goal on that is to keep the boundaries small, still stick to the 65%, and go from there.
What do other members of the commission feel about this discussion?
You need to get the input of start with the street or the area and expand it. I think you need to build a percentage based on that. So if it impacts that street, there should be a limited number there. As in the neighborhood, it expands because if you have different routes, it doesn't impact you so much. So based on how close it is, the proximity of the house, build it and then out as it in farther away, the less percentage of people have to agree with it.
Oh, I see. So it's like like a bullseye, like the people closest need the most approval, and then as you spread out, you need less and less. It's kind of like layers.
Exactly.
Okay.
You sort of have that built in today with 100% approval of people that are immediately adjacent to devices. So yeah, I think for the next time we can come up with, it's always, for me, it's always good to see examples. So why don't we show you a couple of recent projects and kind of how it laid out? Because in next time we come back, it's still draft. We can modify things, but so this is great discussion tonight to give us some things to work on or bring you options on. So yeah, we can make that more real with some examples. I like that.
Nice. Thank you, Commissioner Kuhn.
I'm not hearing any other comments, so I think sounds pretty good.
All right. Thank you very much.
Agenda.
Yes, I think the next thing is the reports. I think Bobby had offered to go to the pedestrian advisory committee and Brendan to the bicycle advisory committee. Were you guys able to go to that? And do you have any comments from their meetings the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, I went and, I was impressed. It's going to take a little while to get used to going to them and the amount of work that goes in on them.
Okay. Well, thanks, Bob. And yeah, if there's any you can't make, feel free to reach out to me, and we can find a substitute. If something comes up. But I really appreciate you making that commitment.
Well, I was a little off because I thought it started January 1st and we got some stuff in December and I wasn't set yet. It was more, I thought it started as a new year, so that might have been my fault.
So now this is our informational items, 2 from commissioners and staff. Which is just commissioner discussion. Any points here?
I have one when you're ready for me.
Bring it on, Jeff.
Staff did a quiet zone presentation in early January for the city council. Could have done the same presentation for you. I didn't really think of it. But that's okay. You can watch the tape if you're interested. But basically, we had a series, a lot of crashes towards the end of the calendar year 24. We finished the calendar year, kind of a high year, but not a record high year.
This is train crashers you're talking.
This is train crashes, quiet zones, train crashes, yeah. And so that caught the attention of the FRA, which is the Federal Railroad Administration. And they essentially have told us we need to do a bunch of things by February 28th, where they'll suspend our quiet zone, which means the trains will start sounding their horns through town. We're on track to get most of the projects done by February 28th. This winter's helped us a lot. And if it holds out through February, we'll have a lot of these improvements in place. So I put it on, jumping ahead to the tentative agenda items. We can talk about that in April to see if we made it. You'll know, you'll hear them right away. But I think we'll make it. And, knock on wood, since that time, we have had one trespasser crash, but no fatalities over the winter. So we've gone several months. We haven't really put a lot of things in place yet. There's radio ads going on, social media posts going. We've got some educational pieces that we're going to stick to the sidewalk near all the crossings. There'll be suicide awareness signs going up soon. Over $500,000 worth of fencing near all the crossings and a number of trespass locations that are away from crossings. And that should really make a difference. So yeah, hopefully we can start driving this number down a bit over the years. So that was just a quick update in case you missed that council presentation. I think it was the first or second meeting of the year.
Is that, I can appreciate this is a major project and a hurdle that you have to get over, but are you able to include Fanning and Steve's in the mix of your discussions? Fanning and Steve's have wayside horns instead of quiet zones.
So the wayside horns are technically quiet zones, but some people call, like full quiet zones or, yeah. So we also, once we get through this hurdle, we will initiate that project, which is to try to get rid of the wayside horns, which requires more physical improvements at those two crossings, Fanning and Steve's.
Would a simple jersey barrier in the center of the street on both sides of the tracks, would that allow you to qualify for a true quiet zone?
No, it's not that simple. No.
I noticed probably about a month ago that the crossing on crossing on Beaver heading south was ground down, so the bike lane was not nearly as jarring, and I was very pleased to whoever took care of that.
That was city crews, and that was a result of some of these walkthroughs that we've done with the FRA and the ACC and the BNSF. Yeah, that was a nice improvement. In the past, we've tried to yank all the concrete, and then inevitably one piece rises or lowers. So that was a nice, relatively easy fix. Yep, it was a good fix.
Thanks. I think I read through I went through the agenda item earlier on my own for that item a couple weeks ago, but thank you guys for all the work you're doing with that. One question I have is, at this point in time, we have a lot of projects that are federally funded. Do you know if they're going to continue, or like how's that affecting you guys or our planning?
I don't think we have any official word. Of course, fingers crossed, we received a RAISE grant, $19 million for Butler just like 3 weeks ago. And then working backwards, yeah, we have a number of large federal grants that are not super far along. So yeah, they all seem a bit susceptible, but I don't think anyone really knows what's going to happen.
Okay, but so for my information, with those generally you don't get the money until it's kind of spent, and so if we haven't started construction, then it's not like we have it in the bank somewhere.
Yeah, we do not have any of those in the bank. There's a number of federal steps We do grant agreements. That's one of the first. So it's like a bunch of things that kind of start locking you in. Grant agreements, the very first one. We have grant agreements, I think, on everything except for the raise grant from 3 weeks ago. So that's good. And then, yeah, and then there's IGAs with different agencies, and then there's actually design and spending money that gets you obviously way more in the door and much less likely to lose. So, yep, we're doing what we can.
Okay, thanks. Also, congratulations on the raise grant.
Yeah, it's great. Huge deal. Huge deal. And while I'm talking, if you drive Butler at all, you'll see construction signs that have gone up to let you know there'll be delays soon. That's the Lone Tree Overpass starting in 2 weeks. So that's huge.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I thought you said, the raise grant's awesome, right? But like, that's been planned for so long now that Butler on that side of town has deteriorated quite a bit. And I was just like, okay, so we're still 18 months away from this getting repaved, huh?
It's gonna be rough. Yeah, lots of projects. I think in April, we often do the capital update also, so I'll throw that on here. So we'll probably, in addition to having David back, we may be able to talk about Streets Master Plan, which is another federally funded project that's just about to get started. We'll talk about quiet zones, and maybe we can do a capital update, especially kind of construction projects that are about to kick off for April.
Cool. Well, thank you very much. As I've been informed, I no longer feel the need to have a motion to have an adjournment. And also, we made the entire meeting without a motion, so
It's a good meeting.
congratulations, team. I mean, if we do a motion, it feels like we did something at least, you know? So, but anyway, meeting adjourned. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Hang up and the mute.